Hello everybody, this is Connor at BoatsDon'tSink here with another deck profile for you all. Today we're going to be looking at the second of the five Quintessential Quintuplets waifu decks. Last time we looked at Ichika. Today we're going to be looking at Nino. This is an 8 standby deck. Nino had 1 standby in set 1 and kind of focused on this weird mechanic of standing during attack phase with some restanders and whatnot. However, in set 2, she's shifted completely toward a standby focus. So looking at the deck list itself, we are still in red and blue from set 1, but we've taken a shift away from sort of the costless cards and gone just more all in on like a standby theme here. Lots of standby targets, lots of good utility to support standby in this deck. Those of you familiar with the sort of meta quintuplets build right now is also an 8 standby deck, but plays a lot of the Ichika cards to support Nino. This deck is going to be missing some of those, but overall still has a lot of really powerful tools to support an 8 standby shell, and really is still playing all of the key cards and ideas from that meta deck. So if you're looking for a really strong waifu deck out of this set, this is maybe about as good as it gets. This deck is really strong, really great standby deck, especially if you like Nino as a character. I'm sorry for those of you that do, but, you know. Looking at the Climax Combos, we have a 2-2 and a 3-2. Unlike some standby decks, which don't really get to have cool combos and just play standby for standby, we actually have good things to do with our standby climaxes in this deck. The 2-2 is kind of just a standard effect to stand itself off of the climax. So when you play the standby at level 1, you're bringing out this 2-2 to front row and being able to attack with it in the same turn. It also gains 1000 power cross turn for that. However, the 2-2 is a bit weird. It's more of a burst power offensive thing. You'll see that with a lot of the standby cards in this deck. Rather than being big on offense and defense, they focus primarily on offense. And we're going to be using a lot of our assists and globals to buff up their defensive power. The level 3 Climax combo is a finisher. However, it is also one of the effects that gives itself standby trigger. We saw this in Tokyo Revengers with the Draken 1-1. However, in that deck, that was the only part of the combo, was just that it gained an additional standby trigger. In this deck, we're going up to 12 standby triggers and also get a finisher on it, which is very powerful, and really allows this deck to win both through the early and mid game and in the late game with a strong finisher. So taking a closer look at our 2-2, the big thing here, it's 7k base. It goes up to 8k if you use the combo. And if all of your characters are quintuplets, which should be always in this deck, hopefully, it gains 2 abilities. First is Encore, which is very important on any standby target nowadays. It's just discard a quintuplets character. And it also gains 5000 power during your turn, meaning it's going to be attacking for 12,000, 13,000 on the turn that you combo, which is very big. It's bigger than most standby targets are going to be able to reach. So your 2-2 is beating the rest of the standby targets, and even though it's small on defense, it has Encore to keep it around. So you might not be maintaining as much hand, since you're going to have to encore your character more often, but you are pressuring your opponent's board a lot more than a lot of other standby decks you're going to be able to do. And 8,000, you're bringing this out at level 1, right? So 8,000 on the first turn cycle is still probably going to be able to win lane against a number of decks that are trying to contest it. So still not a small power line at level 1. At level 2, it is going to be a bit smaller, but we have other things to move into by that point. Our finisher, as I said, it gains a standby icon as long as the specific climax is in your climax area. So if you trigger these, you have effectively 12 standby triggers. We do actually have some really cool tools to try to abuse that and set up turns where we trigger 2 to 3 standby in a single turn without using any of our climaxes, which is really powerful. Helps us establish really strong boards at level 2. Second effect, again, a burst power sort of effect. Nino's only 8,500 base, but gains 4,000 during your turn. So 12-5 on offense, which is reasonably big, and especially by the time these are out, you're going to have globals and assists, making this anywhere from like 14-5, 15, 16,000 power. It heals on play, which is great for any finisher. And its Climax combo for the actual finisher effect is at the end of its attack, pay 1, discard 1 to deal 3 damage, as long as you have 2 or more other characters. 3 damage is a really good number to be burning, especially when you have multiples of these out. And pay 1, ditch 1 is really cheap, especially at end of attack, since it generates its own stock. The one hand can sometimes be an issue if you've had to encore a lot throughout the game, but if you can stand by these out and you don't have to play them from hand, it should be a pretty reasonable cost to be paying. Looking at the actual standby targets that we have throughout the deck, these are really important in this deck, especially since we do have the 12 standby triggers. We're going to be wanting to get as many standby targets out as possible. First up is just a standard 7500 with character encore. This is from set 2. It's just 55, gains 2k if you have 2 or more other quints, and it always has encore, meaning it is safe to stand by out at 0. And if your opponent somehow manages to contest like a 55, you can still encore it. In like the weird situation that happens. They probably can't contest the 55 anyway, but this deck is safe to be standbying to front row at 0. Our second target is a bit unique. It's a 1/145. It gains 2,000 also if you have 2 or more other quintuplets characters, so same power condition. But it's 1k smaller. Instead of having encore, it can't be reversed by cost 0s. So these two standby targets, we're currently playing 3 blue and 2 red in this list. You can shift that to favor one or the other more, depending on the deck that you're playing against. This is built in mind with Danmachi being a very strong deck in the meta right now, and a lot of other sort of 1/0 decks being able to scale up to 8,000 or more power, which can reverse our red 1/1, meaning we have to encore it. However, this blue 1/1, no matter how big our opponent's characters get, as long as they're 1/0s, they can't reverse us, which means we're going to be building more hand advantage in the early turns with this blue 1/1. So that's really strong here, but if you think you're going to be playing against a lot of other standby decks where they're going to have 1/1s, you might want to focus more on the red one. Obviously, we have the 2/2. This is our only 2/2 in this list, so once we're at level 1, if we trigger any additional standbys, this is probably the card that we're bringing out, unless we're bringing out more blue 1/1s. Sometimes you will prefer the blue 1/1 to standby into front row over additional 2/2s if your opponent is playing, again, something like Danmachi where they can just reverse the 2/2s. You would rather take the 1/1s at that point to get hand advantage. As with almost any standby deck, we are playing a 2,000 power assist. This one is from set 1. It has draw 2, ditch 1 on play, which is decent. If you do have to hard play it at level 3, it can help dig for your finisher climax. Otherwise, it's just a 2,000 assist. It does also have a third effect that was meant to synergize with some of the set 1 cards. During your climax phase or your attack phase, when your character becomes stand, look at up to 2 cards from the top of your deck, put them on top in any order, and then give a character 2,000. The only way that we can activate that in this deck is with the 2/2 combo itself. So if you're at level 2 and have already standbyed out this assist, and draw another copy of the level 2's climax and play it, you might get this effect like once, but it's not going to come up very often at all. This is mainly just here to be an assist to make our characters bigger on defense and offense. And lastly, we have the 3/2 Someone Who'll Fall For You, Nino Nakano. This is from set 2. It's just another pretty typical standby effect. If this is in your center stage, all of your quintuplets characters get 1,500 power. Again, it's going to make your board really big, both on offense and defense. We're really trying to shore up our sort of weaker defensive lines to match our high offensive power lines so that we can win board on both turns, and not just on offense. Second effect is when you play a standby, you can look at the top 2 cards of your deck, put them on top in any order, so that's going to help us make sure we don't trigger standby on our first attack. And then you can also give one of your characters the ability to, on attack, look at up to 2, from top of deck, choose one, put it back on top, and put the rest in waiting room. So not only do you know what your first two triggers are going to be and in the order that you're going to trigger them, it allows you to sort of pick your third trigger as well. So really good for making sure you know when you're going to trigger your standbys so that you can get them in an optimal order, triggering clean stock, etc. Just great for like controlling our triggers overall like that. Consistency cards are very important in this deck. As with any standby deck, we're going to need ways to get our standby targets into the waiting room. This deck doesn't have a lot of like free just mill on its own, but we do have a lot of ways to discard specific cards, and we do have some ways built in to sort of churn through our deck here and find pieces that we need. First up, this is one of the most powerful cards in the deck. Daily Routine Nino Nakano. On play, you can discard a Nino to draw a card. We see this in a lot of other decks, just with like discard a traded character. Good for early game, discarding cards that you want to standby out and trying to draw into your standby climaxes. And if you don't draw the standby, you're closer to triggering it. Second effect, discard any card on play. Reveal the top card of your deck. Choose a level X or lower character in your waiting room and return it to hand. X is the level of the card you revealed. This is always going to be able to grab zeros, and we have some really good zeros in this deck to constantly be grabbing back. And occasionally it'll let you grab like an early play or a counter or something. It's really strong with the next card we're going to look at because it allows you to sort of loop the card and resolve its effect in multiple times. So that's going to be the Frank Words Nino Nakano. On play, you can return 2 Quintuplets characters from your waiting room to your deck and shuffle to give a character a soul. This is really strong with our level 3 that gains standby trigger, because if we can mill our deck down to only 1 or 2 cards, we can play this Nino, shuffle 2 copies of the level 3 back, and then play over it with the previous one, discard. No matter what we reveal on the top, we can add the 0 back, play it again, shuffle 2 more copies of the level 3 back, and now we have, 4 standby triggers in 5 cards, effectively, if we were able to shuffle all 4 back into a 1-card deck, which means we're going to be able to make a massive, powerful board without worrying about having any climaxes stuck in our stock. We're almost guaranteed to trigger at least 2, if not 3, standby climaxes in that scenario. Really, we only want 2. We don't care about triggering it on the first attack. But, you get a huge board out of that. Your level 3s are in your stock, at the top of your stock, which means you can pay them out on the next turn and have easy access to them out of waiting room. And you've made a massive board. And you've not really lost any climaxes in the process. Second effect is another effect that's just really strong in standby decks. It returns to hand when you play a climax. Obviously, it opens up a spot on your board for you to standby to. And then it gives a character 1,000 power. And once again, the effect to look at top 2, choose one, put it on top, and put the rest in waiting room. This is sort of Nino's like signature effect in the set, where you're going to be able to choose your trigger from the top 2 cards. Really great, especially with the level 3's climax, since you can check top 2 to sort of try to dig for triggering your level 3 to get a standby. Or just dig for triggering actual standby climaxes. Or triggering clean if you don't want anything else to standby on the board. So overall, just insanely powerful effect, and the 1k power matters a lot as well for just getting over any powerful walls. We have a Brainstorm. This isn't the Brainstorm that the meta deck really loves. That one's unfortunately an Ichika, but this one is good enough for us. When our other character's battle opponent becomes reversed, we can give a character 500. It's going to help us chain offensive power, or defensive if our opponent has to crash the first lane or we're able to counter over a lane. We can just keep chaining that power, making our board bigger. And it's a self-rest salvage Brainstorm. Going to use this to keep our hand as big as we can, obviously. Not super important for just like card advantage in this deck, as long as you can win board. But being able to mill through our deck in a standby deck is always good. And for that reason, we are also playing 1 copy of a spammable Brainstorm. It also salvages, but we can use this one as many times in a turn as we want. It just doesn't plus. This is helpful for getting down to that one card, like 1 to 2 card deck state that I mentioned earlier, where you can shuffle back a bunch of the level 3s. If you have, say, 9 cards left in deck, you can just fire off this Brainstorm twice. And while that is a decent bit of stock to get there, it's worth it for the board setups you can get. It also has Rest to pump 15, which is, again, just good for helping us break boards. This deck's high power lines are already really good at getting through like big early plays and stuff, so this just helps us with that even more. We're playing one Climax Swapper. The Yotsuba name effect doesn't really matter in this deck. On play, look at top, put it in top or waiting room is helpful in the early turns for finding standby triggers, or the later turns. It's also just a mill 1. If we need that 1 extra card to get into our good deck state, and it's Climax Swap. Climax Swap isn't as relevant in most standby decks as it can be in decks with more important combos, but if we get to our finisher turn and draw the wrong Climax, this can be a lifesaver, just to help us fix into our finisher Climax. And lastly, we have in a Yukata Nino Nakano. This is a card that I don't see played a whole lot, but I mean, partially because both of its effects are reliant on you playing almost entirely Ninos, so it really only fits in the waifu deck, but I think it's really good here. If you have another Nino, it gains 1500 power, so it's 25. We're all Ninos, so as long as you open 2 characters, like, you're able to turn this on turn 1. It's really good with like a Brainstorm or Spammable that you can put in the back. If you open this and Spammable, you're able to get up to like 4k turn 1. Which is good at answering oversizes. And then it has, on death, you can discard a card to look at top 4 and add any character with Nino in its card name to your hand and put the rest in waiting room. Typically, these effects only grab level 1 or higher cards, which make them not as great in the early game for like continuing your level 0 plays. But since this can add any Nino, it's just always good, and it can get you your like good discard out cards or your Brainstorm or whatever else you want. In addition to, obviously, like your early plays and other relevant cards. And it helps fill your waiting room with standby targets, which, you know, as I said, early game, having mill to get our, like, 1/1s and 2/2s into waiting room is important. As far as the other cards we're playing, we are still just playing some, like, standard card advantage cards and counters and early plays. We have Fresh from a Bath Nino. This is the 3500 center runner. It's just a really good like turn 1 opener that can hopefully win on board, and that's going to give us hand advantage in the early game. We're playing 1 copy of New Year Nino Nakano. I think this card is really good in this deck. It's a 2/1/7k, gains 6000 when it attacks a level 3 or higher. So once again, just really good at answering these early play boards. But the second effect is beginning of opponent's attack phase, you can pay 1 to exchange this with one of your quintuplets characters as stand. So it's a field swap, which is really cool in this deck with our like early plays and our standby targets because they all have Encore. So a lot of decks at this point are teching into like ways to kick to bottom deck, ways to kick to stock, or they're playing anti-change bombs. So if we have an early play out that has Encore, or we have a 2/2 out with Encore, and our opponent's trying to anti-change bomb it to like send it to bottom deck, we can use the field swap to save it. And in a lot of cases, if they're an anti-change bomb, they're not even going to be able to reverse our Nino, our 2/1 Nino here, which means we win 2 lanes for like 1 stock, potentially. And you know, even in scenarios where it's just like a really big level 3 that they've put a bottom deck kick effect on, it's worth it to pay the 1 stock and lose our 2/1, and be able to save our 3/2 2-soul beater. That's probably got a bigger power line. Well, maybe not bigger than the 13k here, but as big probably. And 2-soul is just important. So. Really good card overall, good at just protecting our more valuable characters, especially after it's spent a turn, you know, coming down and attacking for potentially 13k, 15k, 16-5, depending on your board, to clear out your opponent's early plays. playing 2 copies of the anti-change counter. This is a great anti-change counter because it's really cheap. Not really cheap, but it is cheaper than most. Instead of pay to sack a character or pay to ditch one, it's just pay 2. It requires 4 more quintuplets characters, but that should be very easy in a standby deck, I would hope. We're really good at winning on offense, so really strong card. It's just anti-change to Waiting Room, which isn't great, but for 2 stock, it's worth playing, and it's a 2500 counter any other time. Last character we have is in a Santa suit, Nino Nakano. This is the early play of choice. 2 or less climax can be a little annoying. You know, once we've hit 3 or more, we can't early play it, so it's not always active. Not as great as a like 4 or more character, but when we can get this in play, it heals and has really good secondary effect. If all of our characters are Nino, this becomes a 10-5 with character encore. So you can think of it like Shizu from Slime. That card sticks around a lot and is really good at healing. So anytime we get a chance to just put one of these on the board and get a free heal is great. And since it's 10-5 cross turn, our assists and globals can make this really big and hard to contest on board, which is great for us. Last card we're playing is Important Charm. This is just in a 2-3 event counter. Choose one of your opponent's characters. It gets -3 soul until end of turn. Again, since we're really good at winning on offense, holding up counters should be pretty easy. And this is just a defensive counter that's going to give us a better chance of surviving against finishers. So it's worth playing just to have, since we'll be able to hold it up a lot of the time. Not many ways to grab this card in this deck other than hard drawing it or using the level 0 Nino to like discard a Nino draw card. So if you get one early, you probably want to hold it as long as possible. A couple of other options you can play in the deck, mostly to build into like your own meta, depending on like what threats there are to your deck. As I said, like our 1-1 lineup can change a lot depending on whether we're playing against 1-0 decks or other standby decks. So some other options like that. First up, we have Extended Helping Hand, Nino Nakano. This is more like utility to help us control our deck size. It's a 500 assist, which is fine early, but it can pay 1 and sack itself to check top 4 at a quintuplets character. That's really good mill for us to get through our deck state and try to set up that like 1-card deck wombo combo with all the standbys. Since it's a 0, we can also always add it off of the level 0 Salvager. So we can sack this, check top 4, play the 0 Salvager, get it back, and play it and sack it again to check top 4 again. Which, while it's not card advantage and it is using stock, it's hand fix and it's mill, which can set up really powerful deck states in this, as we've talked about. Next we have Tsundere Nino Nakano. This is from the Trial deck, or the Quintessential set. It's just another 35 that you can play instead of the runner. If for some reason you think this is like the runner's going to get reversed or answered pretty easily, this can pay 1 to save itself. So it's 35, and even if it dies, it's just 1 stock to get the plus, rather than relying on not being answered. I don't think it's as good, but it is another option you can play. 1-0 Sleeping Pills Nino. This is probably decent if you're playing against other standby decks. During your opponent's turn, all your other quintuplets characters gain 1000. Pretty good with the red 1-1 to make it 85, maybe 9k on defense at level 1 to wall up against other like 1175s, 1185s. And you can rest this card to choose one character in your opponent's backstage with level higher than your opponent's level. That character cannot stand during your opponent's next stand phase. So if you're playing against another standby deck and they play their standby and get like a 2-2 to back, you can lock it down for a turn and try to prevent your opponent from being able to answer your standby board with their own standby board. 2k counter is pretty self-explanatory. So self-explanatory I forgot to put the effect on this slide. It's just a 2k backup. If you want to protect 1-1s, especially if you're playing the red one, go for it. Separated and Lost Nino is an alternative 2-2 that you can play. Full board, it's a 10k with Encore. I don't think this is nearly as good as the 2-2 that's in the list already, but if you're really wanting defensive power in the deck, it is 3,000 power bigger on defense. So maybe worth it there, but I much prefer the ability to answer board and stand itself with the combo that we have right now. You could play some split of them, but I don't think you want to go like super heavy on 2-2s when we have such good 3s to be putting out. Obstructing Barrier Nino is an off-climax finisher that we could consider playing. It's a little awkward because we have to reverse, and we're a standby deck, so we are probably winning board. But gets reasonably large. It attacks for minimum 12k on it. Well, not minimum, but it attacks for 12k on its own if you attack with it last. And it's just pay 3, ditch 1, restand during the turn you play it when it reverses battle opponent. So decent off-climax finisher if you want it. Another off-climax finisher option is Pure Wish Nino. 9/5 base during your turn gains 4k. So 13/5 is really big offensive power, and it's just during your turn, when battle opponent becomes reversed, pay 1, deal 1. Part of me wishes this was during opponent's turn, or pay 1, ditch 1 during both players' turns. Because, again, we're a standby deck, so if our opponent's crashing into us, we might not ever really get to use this. But maybe an okay card to play like 1 to 2 of. Another, again, off-climax finisher option. This one's an event, but this doesn't require you to reverse, so it is really good when you're winning board. You need 5 or more Nino in play, so that's why this doesn't see much play in the meta build. But you choose a character and it gains, on attack, reveal the top 9 of your deck, shuffle them back in, and deal X to your opponent. X is a number of standby icons you reveal. So this is really interesting because if we play this with the level 3 Climax combo, all of our level 3s in deck get standby icon, which ideally at this point they might be on our stage to attack with them, but this is a 2-2 event, so you can play this at level 2 on a turn that you do like the big shuffle back thing and just like deal 3 to your opponent guaranteed or something for 2 stock, which is pretty cool. Or you can use it just alongside your finisher turn, and in 9 cards, you're probably going to see 2 to 3 standby on average. So 2-2 event to deal 2 or deal 3 is pretty reasonable. Just as an additional extra finisher option. In conclusion, standby deck, lots of standard standby options, but this deck has lots of high offensive power, more so than most standby decks. So that sort of sets it apart. In that aspect, lots of cool plays you can make with controlling your deck size and constantly shuffling back the 3/2s to hit more standby triggers than most decks. And it has the options to sort of switch around its cards to fit whatever meta you're playing with different 1/1s and 2/2s, whether you want to go more offensive or defensive. So overall, great deck. If you like Nino or you like standby decks, this is probably one of the best decks you can build out of quintuplets. Apart from sort of the Ichika-focused standby, like Nino Ichika standby deck for the meta build. But as far as waifu decks go, this deck is insane. So, really cool deck. Thank you guys for watching. You can find me at Twitter, at BoatsDon'tSink on Twitter. You can find our store at Iron City Games on Facebook or ironcitygames.tcgplayer.com. You can get singles, playsets, and sealed product there, so go check us out. And next time we will be back with the Miku deck. So thank you guys, and I'll see you then.